The Detroit Lions had rookie OTAs this past weekend, which meant our first look at the draft picks, the undrafted free agents, also some veterans coming in for tryouts. But then there's also this group of rookies, 12 undrafted players that are heading in for a tryout that did not sign, but could ultimately be signed at some point by the Lions, that the Lions just wanted to get a little peek at. And today, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to take a peek at these 12 players that the Lions brought in for a tryout. So let's get right into it. So this is going to be similar to the UDFA video that we did, but not as in depth. This one's going to be much quicker. Some of these players, it was kind of difficult to find much film on, and I wasn't sure if I actually wanted to do a video like this. I do plan to talk about the veterans the Lions brought in a little bit more detail potentially tomorrow. But that being said, I'm not sure if we're going to do that just because we can kind of keep an eye on if they actually sign these guys. There's already NFL film on these players, but these undrafted rookies, we really don't know a lot about these players, and we haven't talked about them really at all. So today I wanted to give them some attention. Is kind of that first, like, okay, that's the first impression. What do you think as soon as you saw this player? And that's what really today's video is. So we're not going in really any particular order here. We're going to try to keep this thing short and sweet. Let's get right into it. First off, with the one quarterback the Lions really brought in throughout this entire process to get another look at, and that's going to be Cole Snder, the quarterback out of Eastern Michigan. He's been in the collegiate level for a long time. He transferred from Rutgers over to Buffalo. His coach ended up leaving Buffalo, and then he transferred to Eastern Michigan this past season. And statistically, while it was improvement for him, 60% completion percentage, 2,600 yards, 9 interceptions on the season to 15 touchdowns. Wasn't a great year for Eastern Michigan, but the numbers were in an okay spot. What was very noticeable when you watched him, for me at least, was immediately the control of the offense, the command that he had over that Eastern Michigan offense, the confidence that he had in the decision-making, how fast and how decisive he was to take off and move in the pocket, the read option and the RPOs that they would utilize offensively, and the way that he was really reading it out, right? He wasn't making predetermined decisions there. He had a really good, comfortable feel over the game at that position. Now, he's not the biggest quarterback, maybe a little undersized, 6'1", 210 pounds, but he has some athleticism, has some movement skills to him that's super noticeable. I didn't feel he was as loose on the move to be like, okay, throwing the run, there's going to be a ton of success here, but there is some ability to clearly take off and find some success. He showed a ton of toughness as well this past season. I mean, just taking shots, getting back up, and continuing to fight, and I absolutely love that. From an accuracy perspective, I didn't love it. I feel like some of the underneath throws, there was just inconsistency at putting the ball where it needed to be when guys were settling down in the zone coverage. He made a lot of guys kind of reach for passes at limited run after catch opportunities, but I did like the timing, the progression underneath. It seemed to be a pretty quick process. He had a nice little feel for man zone, seemingly where that he wanted to get to, and that really allowed him to slow things down when the blitz came through, overloaded by pressure, and he had to make a decision. There was an ability to really kind of slow things down and play with some calmness in those spots. Now, he did take a good amount of sacks, but he played with some calmness when he was in those positions. And I felt level 3, some of the deeper passes, the ball wouldn't always kind of turn over. You got some passes that would really just kind of rise on him, and he would get tendency to kind of throw off his back foot, which led to some inconsistencies as well. But you saw some force, right? When he really stepped into it and delivered some of these passes, there was some juice that he could deliver some of his throws with as well. And he had some real timing on some of the vertical passes when he would get the ball out. He didn't seem to throw very late. He was pretty decisive, like, this is who I want. Here's where I want to go. This is a matchup that I like pre-snap. And he just felt super decisive as a whole when you watched him play. And he utilized his eyes well underneath. There was kind of a zone sense there. He had some, I don't want to say no looks, but some look-off passes to him where it's like, all right, read 2 to 1, right? Kind of read inside, hold that zone defender. Now he can come back outside. So there was a nice little feel to his game. Overall, some of the accuracy things led to some questions for me, some of the touch as well, but the toughness was there. The athleticism is noticeable, and so is the feel for the game. So the Lions, who, remember, they cut Jake Fromm, gets us started off. And now let's move on to the next player. And the next player we're going to go to is a fullback. And this fires me up because this is Dwayne Martin. And I apologize if I'm saying any of these names wrong, out of Louisville. This is why it fires me up, because I think the Lions fullback is coming back this year. That was my thought coming into this offseason. They didn't really go after like a fullback. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm wrong on this. But I thought when we added John Morton, who utilized Jason Kabinda in his offense when John Morton was here last, that, hey, fullback is going to be on a return for the Lions. And if it is, it could be a guy like Dwayne Martin. Now, I do want to make this clear that all of these players the Lions are looking at, for the most part, if any of them did make the team, you would assume that the first priority is definitely going to be special teams. It's not going to be the position they're actually playing. That's great, become a positional player, but it's most likely going to be for special teams. It may not ever get beyond that. So anybody that can actually serve special teams value, you don't expect that out of your quarterback, of course, but for the most part, if you can serve special teams value, that's probably the first thing to look at for a lot of these pieces, especially pieces like this that really don't have that much production in terms of receiving production. Dwayne Martin has essentially no production, 2 receptions, 17 yards. The one I saw this past season was an 11-yard kind of just rolling into the flat. He ran through the ball. It wasn't that pretty, and then shows super soft hands, but he made the grab. And he's a really stocky build, 6'1", 260 pounds. Dude looks like a hefty linebacker that still shows some athleticism to it. He doesn't look clunky as a mover, but he was truly that. He was the lead blocker. He led the way. He was utilized on short yardage situations. He was utilized to lead block at times, mainly forward lead plays. And what I did like is that he would break down. He created a wide base. He was very firm on contact. He felt very controlled into his entry of blocks as well. And that wide frame that was well filled out just felt perfect for that position. And want to add some receiving production to that. You think about tight end. Well, he was lined into in line at times. You saw some of the power, the people moving ability. Are you going to get that kind of fluidity and coverage, right? That's going to be the question, because he does play with some of the technique that you can buy into in a lower body, but that's something he's going to have to showcase as well. And then on special teams, you saw him like in the personal protector role. I could definitely visualize a piece like this on kick return, right, where you can kind of have him lead the way and just find somebody and push him out of the play. A lot of these tight ends that we brought in feel like they could kind of fall in line to that type of role. The Lions value special teams. So think about these guys that can lead the way and block. It's not just for offense, for that as well. I'm going to go to Luke Deal. So speaking about kind of these tight ends, let's go to one out of Auburn who blocked his tail off this past season. Again, another older player coming out of Auburn, just in terms of experience here. His career 17 receptions for basically 100 yards and 2 touchdowns isn't great. He was also a Jason Witten Man of the Year finalist this past season, also a 2-time team captain over the past couple of seasons as well with Auburn. He had a nice build here, 6'5", 260. He's well filled out through his frame, and he was truly utilized as a lead blocker. Now, not as much in the fullback role, at least from what I saw, is more so as your traditional tight end, but he'd utilize him as a move tight end. They utilized him in line for success as well, and he was very consistent as a blocker. And again, the body type translates really well to this spot. I couldn't help but just think about this guy on return team, letting him lead the way in the success that he could have, and then maybe you can tap into some things offensively as well, but his route tree just felt incredibly limited. I didn't feel like there was much there at all to kind of really dive into, so this is the opportunity to kind of see if there is really anything there for the Lions. But that being said, as a blocker, there's so much to like. As a run blocker, again, wide base into entry, running legs through contact. You saw the swinging hips, which also showed up in pass protection as well. Some of the looseness there, bent knees. He could play with his pads low in line. There was success there. And then on the move, his ability to drop his weight when he got on the space was super noticeable. You could line him up between the tackles and have him have some success there as well. You think about some of those sniffer rolls where you kind of set him in behind the offensive line. He could do things like that. And I love this ability to get up to the next level and drop the weight, have control, sustain that body control through those block opportunities, and move in space with success. But the biggest thing that got me bought in was the pass protection. It was the ability to have him out there in pass pro with his long arms, the short area quickness into entry position, the ability to really get hip to hip with guys, get really tight with offensive linemen to kind of eliminate some of the openings that you could have right there, and then some of the lockout that he could create as well with some of his balance. Overall, like, blocking is a great starting point because the Lions value that out of this position. Again, it comes back mainly to me on special teams, right? How much success can we have there when we're running some of these man schemes, right? Are you able to kind of take your guy out of the play? Where's the sustainability? Are you holding in these spots? I think guys that are comfortable on the move, that tends to tie in pretty darn well here. So for me, Luke Deal is a fascinating player to watch, but these are the kind of spots where it's like, okay, you want to see the toughness, you want to see those things type of pop when you're thinking about rookie minicamp and what you can actually show to people, and then how much can you really show with your hands, right? How soft are your hands? How consistent are you there? Where's your body control? Because that should pop here. And then how much can we add to your route tree, right? Is there anything we could tap into there? Because a lot of these guys, that seems to be kind of the main question for me specifically. Have an offensive lineman, Bryce Benhart out of Nebraska, who has one of the most unique builds, I think, in this year's draft. And not in a great way, unfortunately. At 6'9", 307 pounds with 32-inch arms. That's not typically ideal. You see that and immediately like, yeah, I don't think that's going to work at the next level. Playing right tackle makes you wonder about, like, can he go to guard? Well, I guess if a team's willing to try a guy that's 6'9" at guard, it could be the Lions because they've done it before. Just think Dan Skipper. The Lions have tried something like this before. But you look at his athleticism, you get a little bit concerned, right, with some of the kick step quickness, some of the speed there, the ability to kind of cut off speed rushers feels like it's going to be a problem. You also saw it on wide zone. If he was trying to reach block, you just felt inconsistencies there. I did feel like he'd get off the ball relatively quick, which could allow for some interior potential upside. But the big thing for me was his angles. He looked really tight angles, very proactive angles to help himself set up for success. He showed real juice kind of working in his first step off the line as a run blocker. There was good quickness off the ball. For me, you wonder, like, okay, he's going to be massive, but could we potentially tap into something here? And if we did have him at tackle, there'd be very real limitations, I feel like, in the run game in terms of wide zone things, but can he create some movement? And that he did show his ability to create some movement. Now, he's pretty sluggish in terms of his redirection, which again is a problem at tackle. You definitely likely have to send him some support, but he had some patience when he talked about kind of opening his hips, being able to create that kind of anchor. That way he wasn't off balance that often. He was very patient. Sometimes he would give up the softer edge, which is a problem. He had some patience where he wasn't getting knocked off his spot or allowing a ton of inside wins just because of some of the lack of redirect and lack of some of the recovery recovery there, but he could drive his legs downhill. He could create kind of a wide base. He could create some sustainability. There was some core strength to his game as well. I liked his positioning when he was climbing to the next level. You'd get a little bit off balance. I felt at the next level, right? Staying square with guys. Some of that just he's super top heavy as well, and you're trying to drop your weight, connect with players. That could be a little bit of a problem, but he had enough of the sustainability and kind of the strain where it's like, all right, we could add something here as a run blocker. He might be able to push guys around a little bit if we keep him in a contained environment, right? We're not asking him to run around and chase guys. And then in terms of some of the body control, he had an active footwork, which did allow him to sustain blocks. Fairly loose as a mover in terms of his footwork, in terms of the lower body. You just wondered about some of the consistency and the discipline within those pass sets. A firm punch to his game. You saw some of that upper body jolt. You could really feel it on impact, right? And you think about some of the Lions' offensive linemen they brought in, you felt it on his impact, like when he would punch guys. So I wonder if there's any flexibility here. Of course, special teams, it feels like it's a little bit of a less value in these spots here when you're thinking about kind of offensive tackles, but could he add some versatility? That might be his way to making the team. But also the Lions have had these taller offensive tackles, and they've made it work if they could trust you in pass protection. I do think the way that he takes his pass sets, you could buy into a few things here with his game. And also he feels like he has the demeanor that the Lions would be after. So that's Bryce Benhart, the defensive side of the ball. And I want to go to Corey Suttle. That when I watch him, I feel like this is a very much so a traits pickup. Again, you're looking for kind of special teams value as well. But when you think about a couple of the guys the Lions also that are having compete within this as well, you think about Kingsley Egukan, and for the Lions, they ended up signing a UDFA center in Leaf Altanu. So, okay, there's some competition there. When you think about the edge position, they have Isaac Ukwu, who's competing in this as well. There's 4 guys. Isaac Ukwu is one of them. And the Lions brought in 2 defensive ends to these tryouts that had opportunities to compete, and both of them I like. Now, Keith Cooper Jr., we're not going to talk about today out of Houston because he was in our last UDFA video. He actually didn't sign. He was one of the players that were kind of off there. So it's technically only 10 UDFA signings. He was technically a tryout as well, a guy that I was pretty excited about. I even said in that video. I thought it was also intriguing to me as well because he feels like a traits type of pickup at 6'4", 260 pounds, 33.5-inch arms, 35-inch vertical, explosiveness that he carries, the closing burst that shows up in his game as well. And that's what it feels like when you watch him, right? You don't feel like there's a ton of diversity within how he actually wins as a pass rusher. Didn't feel like there was much of a plan once he stalled. There also felt like there was a lot of just predictability within his hand usage. There wasn't a lot of creativity there, not a lot of craftiness, not a lot of creativity in how he'd win as a rusher from inside to outside wins. It felt very straightforward in how he won, but he had some quick feet. He could deal with wide zone opportunities. I thought there was some short area quickness. It allowed him to kind of stay in place, find a way to shed, kind of work over top of blocks, which showed him his athleticism as well. He could kind of close space in the run very quickly. Timing in his get off was hit and miss, but when he did get off the ball, there was some explosiveness upfield. There was some pop into that entry point as well, and he would cover some real depth working off the ball as well. Now, from consistency perspective, he felt like he'd get pushed around a little bit at the point of attack. Like this was a player where you could kind of run at him, push him out of the play, down block him out of the play. He wasn't playing with a consistent base or a foundation where he would kind of settle himself in, but he could work single blocks, right? He'd create kind of an anchor early just by winning on an edge against a tackle, or he'd get a nice pop into contact. He'd settle himself down, and all of a sudden he had a little bit of leverage. He can kind of force things away from him. It's just double teams, things like that, standing your ground, creating a foundation. That wasn't there very often. And then from a pass rush perspective, he has the length. He had some push-pull opportunities that you would find. There was some flexibility within his game as well to kind of keep working. He runs his feet through contact. Again, that short area quickness, it could add to some stunt capabilities early when you're trying to find some versatility to ways that he can actually win when he would just kind of stall out. And then for me, in building to shed blocks, he had an aggressive nature, an aggressive feel. There was a suddenness to his game. He had some of the strength in his game to kind of rip through blocks. Speaking of the push-pull opportunities, some of the core strength there, some of the knee bend as well when he kind of work back over blocks, some of the short area movements. And then he utilized his hands pretty well. He was long, so he'd get in pass lanes. He was a very active piece when he saw him on the field. Now, he was rotational at DM, but he played both sides, and he was a very active piece with some punching power that you felt like you could get away with at the next level. And to me, with some of the movement skills, the ability to get going, Corey Suttle, with also having Keith Cooper Jr., I think the Lions brought in some legitimate competition. Clearly, they have a type, right? They want these bigger guys, some explosiveness. And to me, that's what Corey has. Everything else feels like it's a work in progress, but he does have that you could potentially build on for the next level. Now let's go to the linebacker position because this is another one of those spots with Deron Gilbert, who was also included in these workouts. And we're going to go with Corey Flagg Jr. out of Missouri, the 5'10", 230-pound linebacker. Just had a better feel. He's been versatile defensively. We've seen him work on special teams, 81 tackles and interception. He also had a sack with 5 pressures. I do think he's got some real blitzing upside. That's kind of what stood out to me just by his athletic traits, is that, okay, maybe you could open some things up in terms of his ability to get to the quarterback. And obviously the competition he played was noticeable as well. He would connect with routes on broken plays, kind of settle in, find those, pick those things up. The play speed, like he's got some change of direction quickness. He could work laterally. There was true sideline to sideline range to his game. Like he could work entirely across the field. He had the body control and his scrape ability as well, some acceleration to kind of squeeze some angles. Like he had real movement skills, which pop when you think about special teams. Think about Deron Gilbert, who's undersized as well. The linebacker spot, he's just more so on the lighter side, right? But you want some coverage feel to that. You want some special teams ability as well. And then in terms of like the game slowing down for him, I did like that he kind of trusts what he felt. He felt it and he would go. He would attack. There wasn't a lot of hesitation to his game. You felt like you were watching a player that had a ton of experience. His vision in traffic, his ability to kind of work through screens and space, being undersized. He just had a nice little feel. Like he played fast. He was detailed, but he was very disciplined in what he did in terms of he just went for it, right? He didn't really second guess himself very often, which led to some of the better play speed as well. And for me, he had some of the looseness to get skinny in traffic, right? And kind of make himself a small piece, which allowed some blitzing upside. You liked his tackling in space. Like his stoutness would always pop as much, right? He would kind of get pushed off his spot when he's trying to fill gas. When offensive line would connect with him, you kind of push him out of the play. He did play with some good hand placement on entry. I think there's some real blitzing upside. I think the closing speed speak to that, and he played fast. That'll be the thing that could get him some attention early when I look at a guy like Corey Flagg. Now, speaking of linebackers, let's go to another one here. Next up, we have Malachi Langley out of Fresno State. It's a very compact built 6 foot, 221-pound linebacker. Again, back to the kind of the undersized aspect. Very compact build though here. Again, athletically, it's not outstanding. 4.7, 4.40, but the 701 3-cone drill, you can buy into that. The 33.5-inch vertical, we can buy into that. He was also utilized on special teams, on the field goal block team specifically. He wasn't always utilized on third down, which was one of my concerns. Like he wasn't kind of that piece for them defensively, which is kind of something to keep an eye on. Like more of kind of a zone coverage piece. That man coverage would be pretty limited, maybe kind of settle in underneath, take away some flats, things like that. I mean, he did have the hips to do it. Again, you think about kind of awareness, recognition, stepping in front of routes. He'd find routes in zone coverage. He wasn't just dropping into spots. He'd go find guys into coverage. Working man coverage, he'd settle himself down. He played with some body control. As things got further downfield, I felt it was less consistent to actually like stick with guys, connect with guys. Level 2 and beyond, I didn't feel like maybe he was going to have much impact in coverage specifically. Like he'd get to a spot where he'd find somebody, but could he really latch and connect with somebody downfield? Matchups through traffic tended to be a little bit inconsistent. The sideline speed, working over top the scrape, didn't feel that noticeable either. Lateral scraping quickness was a little bit of a knock for me, but I did like the balance that he played with, and I also like the fact that when he was working in coverage specifically, he had a nice little feel for also still finding the quarterback, right? He had a really good feel for where the ball was. Helped him. He had a really nice first step against the run. Some of the accuracy when he would step down to go play the run, it's just that his discipline to me was hit and miss, right? He kind of play out of his gaps a lot, right? He would kind of just kind of do his own thing occasionally, and I thought that got him into some real trouble. But maybe it's more of an instincts aspect, and I think it was, right, trying to find the ball, but at times it would lead to kind of like exposed lanes that he would give up as well. Reading the mesh point was inconsistent. Really played with the spacing where when he'd fill downhill, he could redirect, he could get into different spots. The tackling technique was really nice. It was a nice wrap-up technique. There really wasn't a lot of leakage on tackles in space, and then he would downhill just kind of light guys up. Like he was going to crack dudes as he was working downhill as a tackler, and he would sink in with bend to enter into blocks. He wasn't as slippery as a guy like Flagg to me, but he was a physical, stout, kind of just like a hitter, man. Like he was a tank at the point of attack. So Malachi Langley, to me, I would be curious to see like how consistent he plays. But the power was there. It was noticeable. He had a special teams demeanor to him. Defensive back room now. We're going to start with, we got a couple of guys here that are interesting. We're going to start with Isaiah Rutherford out of UMass. Transfer. He started at Notre Dame. This is a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. Now he ran a 4.56 40, which is not great for the cornerback position. Some of these guys, you wonder if there's some versatility. Are they going to try to move him around? When I see Rutherford, I think like, okay, maybe he could play some slot outside. Maybe there's some safety flexibility. He was in a down brown defense, so you can understand how much man coverage they would be playing in that spot. He's got a nice build to him, though. He's a little bit more lengthy, it feels like, but he's built out pretty well throughout his frame. 6 foot, 195. And when I watched him, I felt there was a nice little foot quickness, a short area movement skills there for press coverage. There was flexibility. There was some looseness within his hips, right? He had some quick feet. He could kind of mirror with releases at the line of scrimmage. And then when you put him in the zone, right, he was pretty reactive. I thought this was a good example of some of the awareness here. And we grabbed a couple of guys from this game, something to keep an eye on. But that being said, you see him here pass off the route when it breaks inside, then drop off and help over top. Just that quick coverage instinct and quick coverage feel. can get on top of route stems. He could position himself pretty early. He had the ability to really squeeze underneath routes. He kind of could redirect guys, squeeze routes underneath, squeeze routes as they worked vertical in zone coverage as well. I mean, he had that footwork. He kind of step on the stem of routes. I think about him as maybe a slot piece potentially without having a great long speed, where a 4.56 could potentially lock you into that kind of role if that's the spot that you could compete. I wanted to see his tackling in space be better, because when you see him downfield, it didn't feel like he was dropping his pad level. Like, he would get to an angle, but he wouldn't drop his pads that well in space. So I don't know. I just wonder, can he show the physicality there? Because long speed was definitely an issue. The bailing speed in like cover 3 showed up as an issue. I didn't think he had the acceleration when he would transition vertically to stick with guys consistently. I get a sense that this could be a slot competition spot here, but he had 5 pass breakups, an interception, and in the past he also blocked a kick. So again, back to special teams value, which of course is where it's all going to start here. But I wonder about some of the inside-outside flexion with a piece like that. Ooh, a guy out of Vanderbilt, and this is going to be Tyson Russell at 5'10", 184. Again, a guy that could potentially be inside-outside. He was kind of a backup for this team. He only started 2 games this past season, kind of like the dime corner, I guess, for them. 32-inch arms, which I do like for a guy at his size, which is pretty noticeable. The 4.63 40 isn't great, but it's also listed as a 4.57, depending on who you looked at there. The 707 3-cone drill as well. For me, what I did like is that basically, because he was a lower piece, he played with a lower pad level consistently. It allowed him to play with real bend. I thought that he had plus body control when he could work at the top of the route. He could really connect and kind of stick with guys. There was a looseness to it. Of course, he has a slot cornerback type of build, so that's something that's valuable. But 32-inch arms from that slot is also leads to shedding blocks. It can lead to making plays at the catch point. He only really had 12 solo tackles this past season, but you think about a guy of that build, the sink, he had the body control, right? He could deal with half-turn assignments. He can connect with guys at the top of routes. He's got an excellent burst. While he's not long fast, he's got a short area burst that's very good, and you could see it at the catch point. Like, he closed on guys in a hurry. You think about him also with some potential inside-outside flexibility at the next level as well, but also could work on the outside. Like, Meek's on the smaller side, but he does well out wide. Lateral transition burst is a problem. That concerned me with slot. It felt like when things would happen faster, when guys would break the routes underneath, he didn't have the burst to stick with guys. Did like how in off-band coverage he would position himself pretty well, but I don't know that he had the burst to actually work from the slot when things were happening faster against some of the twitchier receivers. So kind of felt like he was in a weird spot here where he'd be like an undersized outside corner, but at least he has the length for it. It just does he have the long speed? Maybe not. You may have to be pretty aware of like the covered spots you put him in, and you're going to have to get some physicality out of him with those long arms, it feels like. Oh, and he played with a controlled pace. He was very assignment oriented, which I liked. He was very detailed in the way that he would play his assignments. He just didn't get off blocks as fast as I would like, which again is another knock from slot, which is like, hey, he's long. He didn't get off blocks that fast. So I don't know. Tyson Russell's an intriguing one. Again, always special teams here, but he could be like a wide corner that's just a little bit undersized. And then you have a guy that I'm going to mess up this name, Naim Muhammad. He actually is spelled like it looks like name. Naim Muhammad. I'm not sure. This is a cornerback out of Kent State, transfer from West Virginia, just under 6 foot, 200 pounds. When I watch him, he looks like the build of a Jerry Jacobs. Look at him again. Some of the movements just not great. The acceleration just felt like it was missing. You could attack him on back shoulder passes. His aggression that he had to play with to deal with vertical routes was a real problem there. His makeup acceleration wasn't there either. He'd fall behind way too easily. So the speed was very concerning, but he felt like he could be a piece that was someone that could potentially disrupt guys off the line. And what I liked is that in zone, he played with a lot of calmness, confidence, really good positioning. I felt like consistently he was pretty disciplined in trail. There was a very disciplined meter, which allowed him to stay alive because otherwise he was going to get torched by guys. And he played with a nice eye balance. It really led to him playing a lot faster because he was heavy within his transitions. Opening his hips didn't feel that quick, those transition spots, but he played with connected footwork to his hands. He played with active feet at the line of scrimmage, which led to a lot of balance. He'd mirror pretty well off the ball. He played with a low pad level. He kind of sink into being a very stout corner. And then when you see him in off-band coverage, he played with really good timing. He was very efficient with his footwork, even though he wasn't that dynamic. He was very efficient with his footwork. Played with really good angles to kind of play a little bit faster as well. I just wonder about some of the body control and man-to-man coverage. But then again, in zone coverage as well here, again, the closing quickness was a problem. You see him on like vertical planes like cover 3 where he couldn't kind of play in between the number 1 and the number 2, working the seam, things like that. But he had the balance when he was sitting down into kind of zone coverage. He had a really good feel. He kind of worked through route combination. I just like a stocky build. I like the vision to kind of find the football specifically as a run defender, the physicality to get off blocks. He was a finisher. He'd step into the box here. Muhammad is an interesting one because he plays that corner, but some of my knocks have actually been on a stick at corner are real here. I wonder about Muhammad as going to safety. He kind of reminds me of a potential, what we had last year with a guy like Mo Norris, where like, okay, maybe his best spot's at safety with that kind of build, and maybe that's where it would have to land. He played the jammer role at special teams as well. And then we have Amir Hall out of Michigan, who they list as a safety, but played corner this past year, right? We had the Will Johnson injury, so he kind of stepped in, 6'2", 205. It's understandable, though. His 40 time is essentially a 4.8. It's like, yeah, that's probably not a cornerback, so that's understandable, but he uses his hands really well. So that feels like a safety from that sense. His hand usage at the top of the route, the timing that he has, the interception that he had against Ohio State and Northwestern to kind of wrap up the year, those were great anticipation plays. Again, some of the flexion didn't feel as great here to me in some of the transitions. The plant and drive burst to me wasn't really that noticeable either, but he used his hands well. He stayed on top of routes. There was a disciplined feel to it. You saw him at the line of scrimmage. He was pretty square at the line of scrimmage. He's very balanced, worked to kind of rework guys, utilize his hands there. And then you saw him in off-man coverage. He had the vision for that spot. He would settle himself in positions to really break on the football. He just didn't have the long speed for me when you put him into man coverage at all. Like, he didn't have the long speed to match with guys. Guys could kind of run away with him. Now, he would stay in the play, but guys could kind of run away with him a little bit. But in zone, he was very smooth. He was smooth in half coverage. He was smooth to kind of get into those spots to redirect, smooth to play in between guys. Low when he was working in half turn spots. He had the body positioning there as well, and he played with really good angles when he was working towards the ball. So I understand why you could visualize a guy like Amir Hall as a safety. That makes a lot of sense to me, but he did kind of line in at that cornerback spot for Michigan. So, we've seen this before. We saw last year we had a cornerback out of Michigan who just didn't test well. That the idea was, well, okay, we'll just move him to safety. We'll see what that turns into. But ultimately, those are the players that the Lions brought in as rookies for tryouts over this past weekend. We'll see if we get any news on these players going forward. Maybe some good things happen, maybe not. But leaving it there, we're going to kind of move forward with this. But I just wanted to give a little initial impression on these players. Again, opinions could change. We signed some of these guys to do a breakdown. Maybe some of my thoughts are just not the same, but overall, that's kind of my initial impressions. I love, by the way, the Amir Hall edition. This guy's smart as heck. But Lions, man, you can see where they brought in competition. Again, you have guys like Kingsley Eguakon, center, Isaac Ukwu, the edge rusher, Deron Gilbert, the linebacker, and Eric Hallett, the safety. So it tells you that, yeah, even though these guys are listed as corner, there's probably multiple pieces here the Lions could visualize as a safety. And also, Hallett has kind of a really heavy coverage background, but he did a lot of things in zone. And if you think about Dan Jackson, what they said about him is that he's better in zone than man, and that's kind of a development trait. So if you have that developmental trait, but you're good in zone, keep it on those guys going to safety. And I think a lot of these guys have that similar identity to them, which definitely caught my eye when going through all these, as you can tell in my notes. So that being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, Prop, for watching, and I'm out.